Everyone laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to let the moment pass. My sister tilted her head, looked me up and down, and smiled the way she always did, before saying something that would stay with me for years. "Wow," she said, lifting her glass. "You're really committed to that comfort food lifestyle, huh? I mean, I'm just joking." More laughter. Someone nudged another person. Someone else avoided my eyes. I smiled. Of course I did. That's what I'd been trained to do: smile, swallow, pretend it didn't hurt. But standing there, with my body turned into a punchline once again, I realized something quietly and clearly. This wasn't a joke. And this time, I wasn't going to laugh along. My name is Emily Carter, and I was 31 years old the night my sister humiliated me in front of everyone we loved. It was supposed to be a casual family gathering, nothing fancy. Just dinner, wine, and the kind of conversations that repeat themselves every time we're all in the same room. I had spent nearly an hour deciding what to wear, pulling clothes on and off my body like they were wrong answers to a question I never wanted to be asked. Was this dress too tight? Too loose? Too obvious? I settled on something neutral. Something safe. Something that wouldn't draw attention. It didn't matter. My sister, Lauren, had always had a way of finding me anyway. She didn't shout. She didn't insult me outright. That would have made it too easy for someone to step in. Instead, she laughed. She joked. She wrapped her words in humor and handed them to the room like a gift everyone was allowed to enjoy except me. And when the laughter came, soft and scattered, it confirmed what I already knew. No one was going to stop her. Not my parents, who were busy refilling glasses. Not my relatives, who pretended to be fascinated by the table. Not even me. I stood there holding my plate, my face warm, my chest tight, wondering how something so small, a sentence, a smile, a joke, could make me feel so exposed. I told myself the same thing I always did. It's not worth making a scene. She didn't mean it. You're being sensitive. But as the conversation moved on and the laughter faded, the words stayed. And for the first time in my life, instead of shrinking under them, I felt something else rising quietly inside me. Not anger. Not shame. Clarity. Lauren didn't start mocking my body that night. She had been doing it for as long as I could remember. Growing up, she was the pretty one, the athletic one, the sister who fit effortlessly into clothes and into rooms. I was the quieter one, the slower one, the one who filled out before I filled up. At family gatherings, relatives would pinch my cheeks and say things like, "She's healthy," while Lauren stood beside me, smiling like she'd already won something I hadn't even known we were competing for. At first, her comments were subtle, almost harmless. "Are you really going to eat all of that? You know, if you walked a little more." "I'm saying this because I care." She always said it softly, always with a laugh, always followed by, "Relax, I'm just joking." In after a seated in degrade, and because she was my sister, I believed her. I learned early that pushing back only made things worse. When I frowned or went quiet, she would roll her eyes and tell everyone I was too sensitive. When I tried to defend myself, my parents would step in not to stop her, but to calm me down. "Emily, don't make it a big deal. She didn't mean anything by it. You know how your sister is." So I learned to laugh along. I laughed when she joked about my eating habits at restaurants. I laughed when she teased me about needing a larger size. I laughed when she posted group photos and tagged everyone except me. Each time, I told myself it didn't matter. That words were just words, that I should be stronger. But words don't disappear just because you pretend they don't hurt. They pile up. By my early 20s, I no longer recognized my relationship with my own body. I ate when I was hungry, but never without guilt. I avoided mirrors unless I had to face them. Shopping became something I rushed through, my hands shaking as I flipped tags, already bracing for disappointment. I developed rules. Dark colors only. Loose fabrics. No photos from the waist down. No desserts in public. Every rule felt like control, but really, it was fear dressed up as discipline. Lauren noticed. Of course. She always did. Sometimes she acted concerned. "I just worry about you," she'd say, tilting her head like a caring sister. Other times she was blunt. "You'd be so pretty if you lost a little weight." And always, always, if I went quiet, she'd laugh and say it again. God, Emily. I'm kidding. The worst part wasn't even what she said. It was how everyone else reacted. They smiled awkwardly, changed the subject, pretended they didn't hear it. Silence wrapped itself around her words and made them feel normal, acceptable, almost deserved. I began to wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe my body really was something that needed to be commented on, corrected, managed. I tried everything. Diets that promised transformation in 30 days, workout plans I couldn't sustain, apps that tracked calories like moral failures. Every before and after photo online felt like a judgment. Every compliment Lauren received felt like proof that I had failed. And when nothing changed, when my body remained stubbornly mine, I blamed myself. Not once did I consider blaming her. Because that's what silent shame does. It teaches you to turn inward, to believe that if something hurts, it must be your fault for feeling it. By the time I was 30, the jokes had become part of our family's background noise. Predictable, expected, almost scripted. Someone would comment on food. Lauren would chime in. I would smile. Life would move on. Until the night it didn't. Because standing there at that table, hearing the same joke dressed up in the same laugh, I felt something crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to see the pattern clearly for the first time. This wasn't teasing. It was permission. Permission she had been given, again and again, to make my body a public conversation. Permission I had unknowingly helped grant by staying quiet. And as much as that realization hurt, it carried something else with it. A question I could no longer ignore. If this was what I had been tolerating for years, what was it teaching everyone else to do to me? The jokes didn't stop after that night. If anything, they grew sharper. Once I noticed the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. Lauren didn't just comment when it happened naturally. She created moments. She steered conversations toward food, toward bodies, toward comparison, always with a smile that made it seem harmless, always loud enough for others to hear. At brunch a few weeks later, the menu barely hit the table before she leaned toward me. "You're really going to order pancakes?" she said, eyes wide with mock surprise. "Wow, I admire your confidence." She laughed. Someone else laughed too. I froze, my fingers still resting on the menu. The waiter stood there awkwardly, pretending to check his pad. I felt that familiar heat rise to my face, the old instinct to shrink, to joke back, to make it easier for everyone else. So I did what I always did. I smiled and said nothing. Lauren took that as encouragement. Later that same day, she suggested we take a group photo. Everyone squeezed together on the patio, glasses raised, sunlight spilling over the table. As the camera came up, she waved her hand casually in my direction. "Emily, maybe stand a little behind us," she said lightly. "You know angles." The word landed harder than anything she'd said before. Angles. As if my body was something that needed to be adjusted, hidden, managed for the sake of the picture. No one objected. A few people shuffled without thinking. Someone cleared their throat. The photo was taken. I stood exactly where she told me to. That night, I stared at the image on my phone. There we were, smiling, polished, perfect, Lauren front and center, me half-shadowed behind her shoulder, cropped just enough to feel intentional. That was when I understood something important. These weren't careless jokes. They were calculated. Lauren knew when to speak and when to laugh. She knew how to make her words sound light while making me feel small. She knew that if she never raised her voice, no one would accuse her of cruelty. And she knew I wouldn't fight back. The line was crossed the night my boyfriend, Mark, joined us for dinner. It was the first time he'd been around my family in a while, and I'd been nervous all day. Mark had always told me I was beautiful, always said he hated how my sister spoke to me, but he'd never seen it happen in real time. That night he did. We were seated around the table, plates full, conversation flowing easily. I almost allowed myself to relax. Almost. Then Lauren leaned back in her chair and gestured toward my plate. "Emily's always been the foodie in the family," she said cheerfully. "I swear, if loving food were an Olympic sport." She paused, letting the room fill in the rest. I felt Mark stiffen beside me. Lauren laughed and waved her hand. "Relax. I'm kidding. She knows I'm kidding, right?" All eyes turned to me. That was the moment. Not because the joke was worse than the others, but because, for the first time, someone didn't laugh. Mark looked at her calmly and said, "That didn't sound like a joke." The room went quiet. Lauren blinked, surprised, then smiled wider. "Oh, come on. Don't be so serious. We joke like this all the time." I could feel my heart pounding. My instinct screamed at me to smooth things over, to protect everyone else from discomfort. But something inside me resisted. For once, I didn't smile. I didn't defend her. I didn't defend myself either. I just sat there, silent, while the tension hung in the air. Lauren shrugged and changed the subject, but her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and assessing. I recognized that look immediately. It wasn't confusion. It was irritation. Because for the first time, her joke hadn't landed cleanly. And for the first time, I realized how much power she had been holding, not because she was louder or stronger, but because I had always helped her hold it. As the night went on, her comments stopped. Not out of respect, but calculation. She was adjusting, watching, waiting, and I knew, deep down, that something had shifted. The jokes were no longer accidental. They were a test. And soon, I would have to decide whether I was going to fail it again or finally cross a line of my own. That night, after everyone went home, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my head. Mark's voice, Lauren's smile, the silence that followed. It should have felt like relief, like someone had finally said what I never could. Instead, I felt guilty. Guilty for making things awkward. Guilty for letting the tension linger. Guilty for not laughing the way I was supposed to. I had spent so many years training myself to smooth things over that even when someone else spoke up for me, my first instinct was to apologize for existing, for being uncomfortable, for not taking a joke. That was when I realized how deeply this had settled inside me. I never spoke up because silence had become my survival skill. Growing up, I learned quickly that conflict always came with a price. If I objected, I was labeled dramatic. If I cried, I was sensitive. If I asked for an apology, I was told to lighten up. Over time, it felt safer to absorb the hurt than to risk being blamed for it. Lauren understood that instinct better than anyone. She didn't need to threaten me or insult me outright. She just needed to smile and wait. She knew the family script by heart, she joked. I swallowed it, and everyone stayed comfortable. And comfort, I had been taught, was more important than truth. I told myself that speaking up would change nothing, that if I confronted her she'd twist it around, that my parents would sigh and say I was overreacting, that the rest of the family would look at me like I'd ruined the evening. I imagined the scene before it ever happened. Lauren laughing it off. My mother shaking her head. My father asking why I couldn't just ignore it. In every version, I was the problem. So I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't feel the pain, but because I didn't believe it would be believed. Over the years, that silence seeped into other parts of my life. I hesitated to speak up at work. I apologized too quickly in relationships. I shrank myself in rooms where I should have taken up space. I told myself it was maturity, that I was choosing peace, but it wasn't peace. It was fear disguised as patience, fear of being dismissed, fear of being misunderstood, fear of standing alone. The hardest truth to admit was this. Part of me believed I deserved it. I had heard the jokes for so long that they started to sound like facts. I compared myself constantly to Lauren, to strangers, to impossible standards I could never reach. And every time I fell short, I told myself that maybe she was just saying out loud what everyone else was thinking. That belief kept me silent more effectively than any insult ever could. What scared me most that night wasn't Lauren's behavior. It was the realization that I had been participating in my own erasure. By laughing, by smiling, by pretending I was okay. I had taught the people around me how to treat me. I had shown them that my discomfort was negotiable, that my boundaries were flexible, that my pain could be minimized if it made things easier for everyone else. Lying there in the dark, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. Why was my silence expected, but her cruelty excused? I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time, I understood that staying quiet was no longer neutral. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't selfless. It was costing me pieces of myself I didn't know how to replace. And somewhere between the ceiling fan's steady hum and my own uneven breathing, I felt a shift not toward anger, but toward something steadier. A growing awareness that if I didn't learn to speak, someone else would keep speaking for me. And I wasn't sure I could survive that anymore. The moment that changed everything didn't happen at a family table. It happened in my kitchen, on a quiet afternoon that felt almost ordinary. My niece, Sophie, was sitting on the counter while I sliced apples for a snack. She was 8 years old, soft-spoken, thoughtful, with a habit of watching adults closely, as if trying to understand rules no one had explained to her yet. She swung her legs back and forth, humming to herself, until she suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Aunt Emily," she said, hesitating. "Can I ask you something?" I smiled. "Of course." She glanced down at her own stomach, then back up at me. "Is it bad to be fat?" The word hit me like a physical blow. I froze, knife hovering in midair, my mind scrambling to understand where this was coming from. Sophie had never spoken like that before. She was healthy, active, still very much a child, untouched by the kind of self-scrutiny that had ruled my life for years. "Why would you ask that?" I said gently. She shrugged, the way children do when they don't yet know how heavy their words are. "Mom says it all the time. She jokes about it, about you." There it was. Not whispered. Not exaggerated. Just repeated. I felt my chest tighten, not with embarrassment this time, but with something sharper, protective, urgent. Sophie wasn't mocking me. She wasn't being cruel. She was learning. Learning that bodies are public commentary. Learning that jokes can hurt, as long as they're wrapped in laughter. Learning that someone's size gives others permission to speak. I set the knife down and turned fully toward her. "No," I said quietly. "It's not bad. And it's not funny to make jokes about people's bodies." She frowned, confused. "But Mom laughs." I swallowed hard. Sometimes grown-ups laugh when they shouldn't. Sophie nodded slowly, absorbing that in the serious way children do. Then she hopped off the counter and ran off to play, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the echo of her words. "Mom says it all the time. About you." That was the moment I understood what my silence had been doing. It hadn't protected me. It hadn't kept the peace. It had allowed the damage to spread. I had spent years convincing myself that I was the only one affected, that if I could just endure it, no one else would get hurt. But Sophie had been listening, watching, learning how women are spoken to, learning what's acceptable to laugh at, and the thought of her growing up with the same shame I had carried made my stomach twist. For the first time, the pain wasn't just personal. It was generational. I saw myself at her age quiet, observant, already measuring myself against my sister. I remembered how early the rules had been written for me, how quickly I had learned to shrink. I couldn't let that happen to her. Standing there in my kitchen, I realized something with terrifying clarity. Every time I stayed silent, I was teaching her that cruelty was normal and boundaries were optional. That moment stripped away my last excuse. I could no longer tell myself that it didn't matter. I could no longer say it was just between me and Lauren. I could no longer pretend that enduring pain was a form of strength, because it wasn't strength. It was permission. And I knew then, without anger, without drama, that if I didn't speak up soon, I would be complicit in passing that permission on. Not just to Sophie, but to anyone who learned to watch me, accept less than respect. I didn't confront Lauren right away. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to be certain. I needed to speak from clarity, not from hurt. I had spent too many years reacting, apologizing, softening my words so no one else would feel uncomfortable. This time, I wasn't going to rush. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, we were all gathered again, another family dinner, another familiar table. The air felt light at first, casual, almost normal. I watched Lauren across the room as she laughed with our parents, her confidence effortless as always. And then, like clockwork, she turned toward me. "So," she said, glancing at my plate, "are we still pretending carbs are the enemy, or did you give up on that already?" A few people chuckled. The old version of me would have smiled, made a joke, let it pass. Instead, I set my fork down. Not dramatically, not loudly, just deliberately. "Lauren," I said, my voice steady, "I need you to stop." The table went quiet. She blinked, surprised. "Stop what?" "Commenting on my body," I said. "Calling it a joke doesn't change what it is." She laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Oh my God, Emily, you're really doing this right now?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I am." My heart was pounding, but my voice didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I wasn't defensive. I was simply done pretending. She leaned back in her chair. "I'm kidding. You've always known that. Why are you so sensitive?" I met her eyes. "If it hurts me, it's not a joke." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were loud, but because they were true. Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it. She glanced around the table, waiting for someone to step in, to laugh it off, to rescue her from the discomfort. No one did. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat. The silence stretched, thick and unfamiliar. "I'm not asking for an apology," I continued. "I'm telling you my boundary. You don't get to comment on my body anymore. Not here, not anywhere." Her smile faded. "Wow," she said. "You've changed." "Yes," I said simply. "I have." For a moment, I thought she might argue. Twist it. Turn herself into the victim. But instead, she scoffed and waved her hand. "Fine," she muttered. "Whatever." It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't understanding. But it was enough. I didn't explain myself further. I didn't justify my feelings. I didn't look to anyone else for validation. I picked up my napkin, stood, and added one final sentence. "If it happens again, I won't stay." Then I walked away from the table. Not in tears, not in anger, but with a strange sense of calm settling in my chest. Behind me, the conversation slowly resumed, awkward, forced, different. I didn't turn back to see Lauren's reaction. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I hadn't asked for permission to be respected. I had stated it. And whether she chose to listen or not was no longer my responsibility. Walking away didn't happen all at once. It happened quietly, in choices so small they were almost invisible to anyone but me. I stopped staying late at family gatherings. I arrived when I wanted, left when I felt the first tightness in my chest. When Lauren entered a room, I no longer adjusted myself to fit around her presence. I didn't brace. I didn't prepare a smile. I simply existed, and if that made things uncomfortable, I let it. At first, she tested the boundary. A comment here, softened by a laugh. A look exchanged with someone else. A joke that hovered just close enough to see if I would flinch. I didn't. I stood up. I gathered my things. I said, "I'm heading out," and I left. No explanation. No argument. No apology. The reactions came quickly. My mother called, her voice tight with concern. "You're being distant," she said. "You don't have to take everything so seriously." "It's doubt have to zeded." An aunt pulled me aside once and whispered, "You know how Lauren is. Why let it ruin the family?" Even my father, quiet as ever, asked, "Isn't this a bit extreme?" Each time, I listened. And then I said nothing more than I needed to. "I've made my choice," I told them. "I'm protecting my peace. I'm not discussing this." It shocked them more than any argument ever could have. They were used to my explanations, my justifications, my willingness to bend. Without those, there was nothing to push against. Lauren noticed, too. She stopped making jokes when I was around, not because she understood, but because she had lost her audience. Humor needs permission, and I had finally withdrawn mine. There were moments when the silence felt heavy, when I wondered if I was being selfish, when old habits tugged at me, urging me to smooth things over, to make everyone comfortable again. But then, I remembered Sophie's question. Is it bad to be fat? And I knew I couldn't go back. Boundaries, I learned, don't require consensus. They don't need approval or applause. They only need consistency. I didn't announce them. I didn't defend them. I lived them. Over time, the pressure eased. The comments stopped. The dynamic shifted not because everyone agreed with me, but because they understood I would no longer participate in what hurt me. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, final. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't felt in years: relief. The strangest part of setting boundaries wasn't the conflict. It was the quiet that followed. Without the constant anticipation of comments, without rehearsing smiles or comebacks in my head, my days began to feel lighter. Not perfect, not magically healed, just quieter. My body no longer felt like a topic up for discussion. It felt like mine again. I didn't lose weight. I didn't reinvent myself. I didn't win, in the way people expect these stories to end. What I did was stop shrinking. I ate without apologizing. I chose clothes for comfort, not camouflage. I stopped scanning rooms for Lauren's reactions and started paying attention to my own. Slowly, the shame that had lived in my chest for years loosened its grip, not because she changed, but because I did. Lauren never apologized. She didn't need to. Justice didn't come in the form of confrontation or confession. It came in the form of absence. Without my silence to cushion her words, her jokes fell flat. Without my discomfort to feed off of, they lost their power. That was the truth I hadn't understood before. Some people don't stop because they understand you. They stop because you no longer allow them access. And that was enough. I used to believe that strength meant enduring, that being kind meant staying quiet, that love meant tolerating discomfort to keep the peace. But peace that costs you your dignity isn't peace, it's surrender. Walking away wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was self-respect. I didn't cut my family off completely. I didn't issue ultimatums or make grand announcements. I simply showed up differently. And in doing so, I taught myself and the people watching me that respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you demonstrate by what you accept and what you refuse. Sometimes, justice is loud. Sometimes, it's public. But sometimes, justice is choosing yourself quietly, consistently, without explanation. And if you're listening to this and hearing your own story echoed in mine, if you've ever been told something hurtful was just a joke, if you've ever laughed along while feeling smaller inside, please hear this. You are not too sensitive. You are not dramatic. And you don't owe anyone access to your pain. Boundaries don't make you cruel. They make you honest. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you want to hear more stories about dignity, boundaries, and choosing yourself without bitterness, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's finally stepping away.